We had one screen in our house. It was a single TV in the family room. And ours was black and white. I mean, that's how far back I go. But we all gathered around that screen and watched together and laughed together and talked together about I Love Lucy or the Dick Van Dyke Show or Andy Griffith or whatever. But we were together. Fast forward to today, we all have our own screen. We've got a portable device, and our kids can be in their own echo chamber. We can be our echo chamber. Our 22-year-olds at the office can be on platforms fundamentally different than us.
This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm one of your hosts this week, Brandon Smith, and joining me as my co-host and co-founder, Randy Hain. Randy, good to have you with me here today.
Good to be with you, my friend.
And we have a special guest today, Dr. Tim Elmore. Tim, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for calling me special. I appreciate that.
Tim is a very special guest. And Dr. Tim Elmore is the author. He's author of multiple books. And his latest book, A New Kind of Diversity, we're going to talk today about leading multiple generations in the workforce. So whether we're leading up, leading down, leading across, we have got the right man for the task. So Tim, really good to have you on the show today.
It's great to be with you. I can hardly wait for this conversation.
So for folks that maybe aren't as familiar with you, more importantly, your work, share a little bit more about your background. What got you into this work and how long have you been doing it?
Yeah. Well, this is, believe it or not, the 45th year of my career. My first paid leadership position was in 1979. But not long into my career, I started working for Dr. John Maxwell, this leadership guru. So I began to see the importance of leadership and leadership development for any generation. But by the late 1980s, believe it or not, Gen X was on the scene. They were the new kids on the block. And I, as a late boomer, not a late bloomer, but a late boomer, I might point that out, began to say, oh my gosh, they're different than us, and who are they and how do we, because they were demanding authenticity, they were a little bit greedy. So 87, 88, I started studying generations, how we're different, how we can collaborate instead of collide. And even then we were beginning to collide because the older folks were saying, kids today. Well, we've always said kids today. You need, listeners, you need to know. It's way back dating to Socrates. He thought kids were disrespectful to their parents and talking all the time. And I thought, that could have been written last week. But we have new kids on the block at the workplace now, and it's Generation Z. And right behind them is Gen Alpha, which are younger children in K-12. But one day they'll be working for us in retail and fast food and later in the workplace. So I'm attempting to help leaders really navigate and not just tolerate the other generations, but bring out the very best in them. How can we capitalize on how Gen Z is different than we are? So that's my goal.
So I love that. So I'm going to kick us off, and of course, Randy and I, we kind of tag team back and forth. So there is this talk, and it seems like it happens every few years. Yeah. This generation, yes. I don't know what to do about this generation. Yeah. So is Gen Z really that different, or is this just kind of that old school mantra, get off my lawn, which kind of just seems to come back with every generation? So I'd be curious to your point of view. What makes them different, and is it really that different, or is it just a new flavor of a new generation?
Yeah. Well, the answer is a little of both. Do I sound like a politician? The answer is yes and no. So it is us. We have to always be on guard post 40 years old from saying kids today. They're never going to make it. They're going to ruin this world. We've said that forever. However, the generation gap, a term that was first coined in the 60s when the boomers were the new kids on the block, has gotten wider. And my theory is, as the screens that are in our life went from public to private, think about your growing up years. I'll think about my growing up years. We had one screen in our house. It was a single TV in the family room. And ours was black and white. I mean, that's how far back I go. But we all gathered around that screen and watched together and laughed together and talked together about I Love Lucy or the Dick Van Dyke Show or Andy Griffith or whatever. But we were together. Fast forward to today, we all have our own screen. We've got a portable device, and our kids can be in their own echo chamber. We can be our echo chamber. Our 22-year-olds at the office can be on platforms fundamentally different than us. So you can see how the gap would get bigger. Neither one is bad or good, but what we need to do is do the work of a cross-cultural relationship, namely, and say, I want to bring out the very best in you. So the thing I always say when I'm speaking about this at a workplace is, we've got to learn to turn our frustration into fascination with each other. If we can do that, we may have something.
You've already got a couple ones. You got collide and collaborate instead of collide. Frustration, turn frustration into fascination. So I want to ask a follow-up question, and then I'm going to hand it over here to my colleague. So my daughter's 22. And Abby was one of your interns.
Yeah, we
many
love
years
Abby.
ago.
She's sharp.
I love her. Of course, I'm
Yes.
a little biased.
Little biased. Yeah.
So last week, so Abby's gone with my wife this week, but last week she calls me up at 7:30 in the morning, Tim.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, what's going on?
Yeah.
And she says this. She says, Dad, right now she's interning for a venture capital firm.
Okay.
It's kind of she kind of follows them around while they're doing deals, and she's learning. It's a great experience.
Yeah.
And then she starts her full-time job next month. She said, Dad, I got to send this email. I don't know how to write the email. I don't know what to call my two venture capital folks. So I call my bosses. Do I call them? What do I call them?
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating to me because she didn't know how to
Craft
this email and communicate multi-generationally.
Yeah.
So my point of asking this question is, I think it goes back to the comment you made around screens.
Yeah.
It almost feels like this generation has gotten a little bit more of an echo chamber. And so maybe they're not as exposed to talking to 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds. I don't know. So I would love your point of view. Is Abby a one-off in wanting to know how to communicate and write an email to another generation? Or is this more of a commonality?
Yeah, I'm glad she had the sense to call her dad. Seriously, she's sharp. I know she's smart as a whip. But I have a friend that recently was driving his daughter to school, high school, and he wanted to get a letter mailed. He said, can you put a stamp on this letter real quick? I'm going to drop it off. She YouTubed in the car how to put a stamp on an envelope. So they've just not lived in our world. And we have not lived, to be fair, in their world. And I always want to remind anybody over 40, in the land of tomorrow, they're the natives, we're the immigrants. They're the ones who are going to naturally get what's coming. And so I am working, even as a baby boomer, I've got to understand them and bring out the very best and welcome the differences they bring. So I made a comment earlier, do the work of a cross-cultural relationship. Let me tell you what that metaphor means to me as I lead Gen Z and millennials.
Beautiful.
If all, the three of us were to hop on a jet and fly over to, let's say, Vietnam, I'm making this up. As we got off the plane there in Vietnam, wouldn't we be psyched up really well to work hard to connect with people there? Because we would know, oh my gosh, they speak a different language. They have different customs here. They have different values here. Bingo. Gen Z, different language. Ask Abby, different customs, different values. And if we'll do the work with Gen Z that we're willing to do in Vietnam, we're going to have an incredible team. But I think we get lazy socially. We do too. And we want to do the work. We hear one story about how they're a fragile snowflake. And we believe all 59 million of them are fragile snowflakes. And you know that's not true. Your daughter is not. She was a great intern, and she was a hoot. She was very entertaining to all of us. So I am now learning to welcome both anybody under 40 and say, you coach me up where I need to be coached up on tomorrow. I'll coach you up on where you need to be coached up on the timeless insights that I've got over 45 years.
Beautiful.
Tim, I want to piggyback on this. I love this line of discussion. I love it.
Okay, yeah.
So we and you live in a couple of different worlds, but the two worlds I want to identify is we are parents of Gen Zs.
Yeah.
We often speak to students. I'm on college campuses a lot. Love doing that work. It's fun. And we also work with leaders every day that have huge teams of Gen Z young millennials. So I see two camps, and they're looking across a river at each other. There's one camp that says, those kids wagging their fingers, why don't you get it? And there's lots of criticism, very little engagement, but lots of criticism.
Yeah.
And then there's a group over here, maybe it's the younger Gen Zs, the millennials, saying, we're different, but we need to be taught. We need some help here. We need some mentorship.
Yeah.
So my point is, and I really want you to expand on this, especially when I'm at college classrooms, I often mention to the students, my generation has an opportunity but an obligation as well to spend time with you, teach you what we need, what you need to know, but also to learn from you.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've got to talk about more. Leaders today have got to get out of this two-camp mentality and go engage.
Yeah.
It's not HR's problem, it's your issue. If you're a leader, you have got to own engaging with, working with, learning from the younger generations. What's your take?
You're absolutely right. And this is the flag I wave everywhere I go. So here is the hypothesis I'm putting on paper. I'm doing a new book called The Future Begins with Z, and how Gen Z is going to upset the workplace and how we can capitalize on it. That's where we need to be. So here's my hypothesis. The age of authority is going down, meaning they're coming in smart as a whip and even smarter than we are in terms of AI and smart technology and how to monetize TikTok. 1 in 8 Gen Zers have monetized social media. Half of those, it's a full-time job. Their app is a full-time job. And they're making really good money. So the age of authority is going down. Without a badge, they come in with some level of authority. Darn it. But at the same time, the age of maturity, I think, is going up. And that's not a cut down. I'm just saying 26 is the new 18. You know, what we once expected 18, you're a man now, let's take responsibility, let's take initiative, let's go, let's be disciplined. It's not happening later. And in fact, this is data. This is not an old baby boomer talking. The data shares with us that cognitively they're advanced, but social emotionally they're behind. Their EQ may be low, and you're going, what were you learning in the classroom? Well, it was IQ, not EQ. So here's what I would say to bosses out there. You're going to need to listen a little bit more than you used to listen. And you need to coach a little bit more than you needed to coach in the past. So can I tell a story?
Please.
Brandy, you've heard me tell this story so many times, so please forgive me. But I love telling the story of Tony. Tony was a college senior 3 years ago at Ohio University. He got a part-time job during his senior year at a paint store. While working at that paint store and while a senior in college, he got on TikTok. I always like to add, of course he did. So he's on TikTok. He's starting to, shoot video of himself mixing paints and doing really creative stuff. But he posts them on TikTok, and within a matter of 4, 5, 6 months, Tony's account goes viral. And when I say viral, 1.8 million followers, 34 million views. So he's got something here, something that could be monetized or used for marketing or whatever. So he decides, boy, I need to meet with the executives here at this paint brand, and I need to put a slide deck together and pitch it to them. So he puts a slide deck together, and he says, could I meet with you to talk about this idea? And I am sad to say that Tony did not get one leader to give him a minute's worth of time. Didn't get one listener. Didn't get one set of eyeballs to look at a slide deck. But Brandon, Tony did get something he didn't expect. Tony got fired because the older leaders were just sure he was stealing the paint or doing this on company time or probably distracting to the customers. So Tony leaves, he's been fired, graduates, moves down to Florida. I just checked, now has over 2.1 million followers and has started his own paint store. Wow. This is a picture of Gen Z. They're highly predispositioned to be an entrepreneur. In fact, sometimes I think they look at our companies and go, I'd rather start something than join something. I look at the antiquated way you do this, that's not the future. You have visibility on the past, I have visibility on the future. Well, we need both, don't we? We need to learn from the past, but we've got to grab hold of what's coming. And Tony's a great example of we better listen and we better coach. Tony needed to be coached by those execs, but he needed to be listened to as well. So I'll stop there.
When I'm in the classroom, just to validate what you said, I think the students really could care less about my 25-year corporate career. What they want to hear about is how did you start your own business?
Yes.
Tell us what are the ins and outs of that? How did you become an entrepreneur? I'm like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I hate risk. But I did start a business because I love doing this work. So I think you're right. I hear it all the time. And increasingly, it's hard for, I think, Gen Z sometimes to rise up to the executive coaching that Brandon and I do. But we absolutely are around them. And obviously our clients are leading them. But they give similar stories. Like they're always coming in with the innovative idea. They want to change this, want to do that. Unfortunately, back to my river, looking across the river analogy, it frustrates them. Instead of engaging and learning from it, they just feel frustration. So I have a follow-up question for you. When you think about promoting greater self-awareness, when you think about getting Gen Z and the people that lead them to be more self-aware about how they're showing up, how they interact with each other, maybe even ways to improve. What are some ways that our listeners can promote greater self-awareness?
Yeah.
Because we talk about self-awareness in our coaching work and our Foundry work all the time.
Yeah.
But how do we foster that? What are your thoughts on that?
A couple of things come to mind, and these are both really activities that we can do. I think that both the young and the old are unaware of the power gap that exists in a workplace. And the older need to know that just because they think they're accessible. They think, oh yeah, anybody, open door policy here. Well, that's not going to help a Gen Zer that might be completely afraid of losing their job if they actually come in and say, you're doing this wrong, or there's a better way to do it. On the other hand, this is going to sound like a grandpa, so please forgive me, because they have spent almost the same amount of hours each day as a full-time job on a screen, Gen Z, they would not have developed emotional intelligence on that screen, especially with abbreviated texts and contractions and what's that mean, RDR or whatever, that sort of thing. So we're going to have to coach them in ways we did not need to coach them in years gone by. When I went to college, I had already had several full-time jobs, and I'm not even great. That's what we all did. To have any spending money, you work all through high school.
Right.
So I didn't walk in as a rookie, a true rookie, when I had a full-time job. I'd already had some hours. Well, now moms and dads are saying, focus on academics, focus on academics. And I think the job skills they're going to get are in a workroom, not a classroom. And all due respect to education, I know we all believe in education and higher education. I'm telling you, it's not able to get them fully ready for the life skills they're going to need. So another little activity that I think Sheryl Sandberg, who was once at Facebook, she started a little game called What's It Like to Be on the Other Side of Me? So you specifically sit down with a person and you give each other, you're very good at this, Mr. Hayne. Can I be candid with you?
I've heard that once or
I'm
twice.
so glad you said that.
Did I say, yes, okay. Did I just
made my entire week. You just did.
Listeners, if you don't know, that's one of Randy's favorite phrases. It's his permission.
Anybody and everybody who knows Randy.
Yeah. Okay.
That's been trademarked at this point.
Right. Can I be
Captain Candor?
That's right, Captain Cantor.
Yes.
We need a cape for you. Anyway, What's It Like to Be on the Other Side of Me is a game you give each other permission to play. And it's meant to play with great civility and candor, but yet friendliness, kindness.
Sure.
But you both are just saying, I don't know if you're aware, but your face when you meet, or your words, your tone, your verbal communication is great, but your paraverbal, the tone you have, is awful. So I think playing that little game, What's It Like to Be on the Other Side of Me, actually gives each other permission for underling and supervisor to really, really, really get real. Let me tell you another quick story. I have a friend that is a consultant that did some coaching and consulting in Tokyo. So she was over there with a Japanese translator. After her presentation, she said, any questions? Nobody said anything. And she goes, great. Good to be with you today. It's been my pleasure. Bye-bye. Walked off the stage. Well, her translator follows her off the stage and says, why'd you leave? She goes, well, nobody had any questions. He said, oh, yes, they did. You didn't see it? And she goes, see what? He walked her back out there now as her coach, not her translator. And he said to these executives, excuse me, are there any questions? Yes. Yeah. There were 7 questions. But in Japan, it's culturally different. We Americans raise our hand, hey, Bob, I got a question for you. They're just looking up, and just looking up is an indication, humbly, I have a question to ask. But she would have known that. This is what's happening in workplaces. I didn't know Gen Z did. I didn't know boomers did that. I didn't know, because we've been in our silos. So What's It Like to Be on the Other Side of Me is a great activity.
I love that.
To begin to build a bridge. One more that I love, and I don't want to get through the recording here without sharing it. I, over the last 6 years, have been practicing reverse mentoring, and it's been a game changer for me. So reverse mentoring, listeners, is where an older and a younger generation person, doesn't have to be a boss, but let's Xer and Gen Z or millennial and boomer, get together and grab a coffee and just swap stories. You always find something in common when you swap stories. So that in itself is a step in the right direction. You guys like the Cubs? I like the Cubs, But then afterwards, you both take turns coaching each other or mentoring each other. So clearly the older can impart some timeless skills and insights they picked up over their years. But then they flip hats. They become the mentee. The Gen Zer becomes the mentor. Like when I meet with Cam, who's 40 years younger than me, I'll say, how could we use that latest app you just got for growing leaders? How could we do this? Oh, it'd be easy. Well, easy for you, Cam. Tell me. I'm laughing with them, but I'm admitting I know I'm a dinosaur in some categories. So I'm okay. And the more I show that I'm secure, by the way, listeners, this is huge. Emotional security is a prerequisite to do any of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
If you are insecure and feel threatened, and good luck with that the rest of your career. But if you'll grow in your sense of security where you can laugh at yourself and say, I know, I should know how to do a Google Doc, but I don't, or whatever. They're going to want to help you. In fact, it's quite an honor for a 23-year-old to help a 53-year-old.
Right.
So I'm just saying these are bridges, not walls that we typically build. But if we can build the bridges, we'll be able to pull out the best in Gen X, in millennials, and Gen Z, and later the alphas that we've had a hard time. I've got one more phrase for you, Brandon.
Yeah.
We need to stop getting furious and start getting curious. You see what I did there?
That's a good one,
See what I
Tim.
did there? So, but we're laughing. But listeners,
your
I'm telling you.
alliteration skills are on point today. On point.
Well, I get furious still. Hey, I'll get honest with you. I get furious with my daughter. And I love her. Bethany is 36 years old. She's been in her career quite a while now. She's a wonderful therapist in Orlando. But I realized I was shutting her down. I was gaslighting. And she didn't ever accuse me of it, but she just would shut down. And I called her one day and I said, Bethany, I want to get really real with you right now. I just got a visit from the ghost of Christmas future. Remember Ebenezer Scrooge?
Yeah.
I can see us going down two paths the rest of our lives. We can either go down the path that my dad and my older sister went down, where they didn't really talk. They were both so stubborn, they didn't really care to be with each other. And at the funeral, my dad's funeral, my sister didn't even want to talk at all. I gave the eulogy. My younger sister gave a eulogy. Lisa did. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's not what I want. I said, Bethany, the other path is the one I want to go down. Could we talk every month for an hour or so? And my one job will just be to listen. I got a little choked up because I thought, I have not been listening to her. And she's so good at what she does. She could give me therapy right now. But I'm thinking, this is what was needed. We had a breakthrough. We had a breakthrough on the first call. But it was me, this guy that's written 40 books and is 64 years old. She didn't care about that. She cares about my relationship with her and do I love her well? So I'm telling you, leaders out there, this may sound wrong. In fact, you can cut this from the recording if you want to, but our people need to know we love them. In an appropriate, we love them and we care about them beyond 9 to 5. If we can do this, I think they'll go to the mat for us. And I've seen that at Growing Leaders. Some of those young team members would be up at midnight for me, but I have to love them first and I have to care in that same way.
Yeah. Tim, thank you for sharing that very heartfelt moment and experience, and we can tell those so meaningful to you.
Yeah.
So I know you said that we want people to feel like that we love them, and voglio, bene makes me think of that. Randy.
Yes,
I know
yes.
you were thinking of that.
Exactly.
I could feel that coming out of your head, my friend. Okay. And we believe that too. Now we want to show that in the workplace. So everyone listening to this is hearing this and it's resonating with them. I know it is, Tim. They're saying, look, I've got to be more open. I've got to be curious. I've got to listen. I've got to spend that time. I've got to do reverse mentoring. I've got to be emotionally secure enough to be vulnerable, which is really, you didn't quite say it that way, but that's what
really
you were
it.
saying, right? You've got to be comfortable enough to put yourself in a vulnerable position. And whether it's challenging an idea or maybe you don't have all the answers. So Randy and I really pride ourselves on practical. And so I think we've got a lot of folks that you had them at hello. Okay. And now it's time to turn it into like practical things.
Good.
What are some things that managers can start to say? What are some phrases they can use to start these conversations?
Good. Great question. All right. So one of the things I hear from managers, hiring managers and supervisors is Gen Z, I really love them, but they seem to be a little fragile. I mentioned that term fragile snowflake before. It's a phrase we use. And they do tend to be. When data is gathered of all 5 generations in the workplace, Gen Z tends to be the most fragile. They tend to be the most difficult to work with because they haven't worked long. So I use a little acronym. And this is the practical application, Brandy, you were just asking for. When I need to confront somebody, let's say they're 25, 30 years younger than me, but they don't have to be, but let's say they are. You know how forever we use that phrase, this is a leg you got to stand on. It's just, this is what you can go to the bank on. ALEG is the acronym I use. The letter A reminds me, start with asking, not telling. So if I need to correct somebody, the easiest thing is, because I don't have a lot of time, let me just tell you what you did wrong here. 4 things actually, write them down. Instead of telling, which that's what I want to do, I'll say, tell me what your thinking was when you made that decision. And I really do want to know. They had some logic, Yeah. So when I ask, they feel valued. Every time John Maxwell asked me questions in my 20s, I felt very valued. So think about what you're communicating. Ask, don't tell, they feel valued. The letter L, listen well. If we listen, well, first of all, it does little good to do any asking if we're not willing to listen. If I walk away, the question had no merit. So listening, if I listen, they feel heard. And this is the number one request or requirement Gen Z has in the workplace. I want to feel like I have a voice. I want to feel heard. I've come to believe that being heard is so close to feeling loved that for the average person, it's indistinguishable. Just listening, boss is listening right now, supervisors listening. Just listening to them is a way of loving them in a very appropriate way. After L, listening, E is empathize. This is the biggest one I've had to work on as an older, I'll just be honest, an older white male that didn't really get good at that earlier on. So when I empathize, I learn to say things, pick what's comfortable for you, but I've learned to say, oh my gosh, I had no idea that happened to you. Or I bet that made you feel awful when that happened. But I'm communicating and demonstrating, I understand you. So ask, they feel valued. Listen, they feel heard. Empathize, they feel understood. Now the letter G, I get to guide them. That's the thing I wanted to do from the very beginning, was offer some guidance. But now I've earned my right to do it through relationship, not my position, not my badge I'm wearing. If you have to lean on your badge to get something done, leaders, you're in trouble.
Great point.
It'll all be done through your emotional intelligence, your people skills, your listening skills. And sure, you got to run point. Of course you got to run point. But you do that after knowing the team has been heard, and we've all got to weigh in. I tell my team all the time, everybody has a voice, not everybody has a vote. Our leadership team has a vote. So sorry. But this is not a democracy. We are leading this organization to success and to growth. But I feel like that's important to say. So anyway, I've probably waxed eloquent way too much, but I think ask, listen, empathize, guide is a key thing.
What I love about that is if we break that down, there's an investment component to it. The first 3 is investing.
Yep.
And then you earn the right to then have the ROI.
Yeah.
But then that also reminds us it takes time.
Yeah.
So you can't do this. Randy loves to talk about jokingly. You can't do like a flyby. Hey, you need
That's
anything?
right.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
well, thanks.
Yeah.
See ya.
Love ya.
You can't,
Yeah.
you can't. You got to really make that time.
It's so true. Hey, let's go back to Vietnam. It's going to take some time to learn those customs and that language.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm telling you, it's a cross-cultural feeling you might have with a 23-year-old.
What's interesting too is every time you talk to someone who feels a sense of frustration with leading, working with, engaging with Gen Z, if you get them to be honest, and I try to go there with people sometimes because I have to do it myself with my own 20-something children, much like I did, is put yourself in their shoes and remember when you were that age. I don't know about you, but I was not a fully formed, experienced leader with tons of experience at 23.
That's right.
I was a knucklehead.
Yeah.
I was a complete knucklehead.
Yeah.
So it helps us create a little bit more patience, understanding, if you go back in time and put yourself in their shoes.
No doubt.
The situation's different, the territory's different, different technology, blah, blah, blah. We know all that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we were all learning at that stage. Well, we had people that taught us. Now those people are us, and we have to teach them. So
that's exactly
I
right.
love ALEG.
Yeah. I've got one last question, and then we'll start to wrap to close.
Okay.
We'd be remiss if I didn't address this. Okay, so I remember a talk I heard you give. This was probably 15 years ago.
Okay.
Tim. And
Back when I was 12?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
sure. Yes.
And you were talking about that whole 8-year interesting gap. And not everybody has that, but that's a gap. And then someone asked the question of, well, how do you kind of fix that? And you told this, kind of gave this analogy of, well, you want to love your kids and support them, and then I think you might have drawn the line right around 10 or 12. And at that point, You need to kind of pivot and turn a little bit. So my point of this question is, as parents, how can we accelerate our kids' growth?
Yeah.
So maybe there isn't an 8-year gap. So
Yeah.
26 isn't the new 18.
Yeah.
So we can start to narrow that down a little bit. What are either life experiences that would be good for them to get, like part-time job, for example,
Yeah.
or other things that we can do as parents that will help to promote that maturation?
The two ingredients that grow up a kid, including us when we were kids, is autonomy and responsibility. And they always need to be given in equal proportions. So 5-year-old autonomy, not much. 5-year-old responsibility, not much. 13-year, a little bit more. 13-year-old responsibility, a little bit more. And I think sometimes as parents, we don't do this well. We want so much to be a pal rather than a parent. We give them lots of liberties, perhaps, and not those equal responsibility, where there's a price to be paid when we're irresponsible. So Randy knows this. I love teaching leadership with images and metaphors. So my favorite image of this is the velvet-covered brick. Leaders need to be velvet-covered bricks. That means on the outside, velvet. There's lots of support and belief and acceptance, and I got your back. But brick on the inside, that means because I believe in you, we're not going to dilute this goal on Tuesday because it seems hard. So they have to be together. Sometimes as parents, we're all velvet, no brick. Well, that creates brats. Listeners, if you're taking notes, that's B-R-A-T-S, brats. That's not a good thing. We don't need any more brats. But if we're all brick and no velvet, that's almost like being a military dad where our kids go, I don't even know if I'm loved here. And we look for love in all the wrong places. I think good leaders and good parents are velvet bricks. Grace and truth, belief and requirements. So, I'll just stop there. But I think that's probably what we've overfunctioned or underfunctioned, preferring to be a pal rather than a parent. Several times when my kids were growing up, I would smile and say, you're not going to like me this week. You're going to love me at 30. You're not going to like me this week. And they would roll their eyes and start laughing because they knew something was coming down the pipeline that they did. But you know what? I wanted their respect more than, I loved them. And love is great. But at that point, I want their respect in middle school. They're going to love me at 23 if I've won them as a leader in the home and we've given them great guidelines. So I wasn't a dictator. And we did a lot of fun things, I want to add. And I think bosses ought to do some fun things for their team. But I'm telling you, that guidance, if we're without it, we're rudderless boats. And I feel like I see millions of rudderless young adults because we did not lead them well as they were growing up.
Tim, this has been fantastic. Randy and I could ask you questions for many, many hours, actually.
Announcing today, part 2, 3, and 4 coming by the end of the year.
It's been fun to hang out with you guys.
Well, and I know we're getting close here on time, so we always ask this question when we kind of land our plane with the Leadership Foundry podcast.
Okay.
What is one practical thing, piece of advice you've got for leaders or managers today that they can start doing today with their younger generation teammates that will help those teammates and their teams thrive starting tomorrow?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is reverse mentoring. We've already talked about that, but I think getting in couplets, getting in duos, and then allowing each other the humility and the dignity to mentor each other, depending on the category, is an incredible, incredible thing. But I always go back to leaders. If there's going to be one migration in a direction over the future, it'll be leaders needing to listen more. I grew up in a generation where the leaders were the benevolent dictators. We were one man at the top, and by the way, it was usually a man at the top calling the shots, and everybody did whatever the guy said. Well, now I think we need to be poet gardeners. And that's a metaphor I use where we're putting words to what's happening in our culture and our vision, and then we're gardening the people, we're growing the people under our care. But that means I'm listening to a team of leaders, and I'm collectively saying, this is what I'm hearing you say. And they say, yes, that's exactly what we're saying. And they think it was their idea. But really what you're doing is collating the consensus, the vision that we all feel strongly about. So it isn't just one person, male or female. It's a team of leaders. And I'm doing a lot of listening, a lot of gathering. And then I make a move that's wise because it's built off of cumulative wisdom from a good team.
Speaking of wise, I think you made us all a little wiser today.
You're kind.
Thank you. So if folks want to follow you, learn more about you, buy a copy of every one of your books,
34, 35?
40 now, but
40.
who's counting?
Where, where can they go, Tim?
Sure. Well, my website's the easiest way to find free stuff as well as the books. It's timelmore.com, timelmore.com. And we do a lot of work with companies and so forth. But then to follow me on any social media app at Tim Elmore on Instagram or Facebook or anything. I have young people that coach me up on that, so I can actually hear from you when you
and you teased us with the new book title.
Yeah.
It's The Future Begins with Z.
Yeah,
Is that
that'll
correct?
be out in
When can we
2025.
expect- Okay, what month next year?
Probably late summer, early fall.
Okay.
So it's almost a year from now. I'm doing a lot of research on this, qualitative and quantitative.
Sure.
Finding companies like Empathize that hire so many young people and finding out what's your secret sauce, that sort of thing. But I'm hoping to put a little encyclopedia together for anybody that's having a little hard time with the youngest team member, but they know they're the future, they're the native, I'm the immigrant here. Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Randy, for that. Oh, there is one more thing. Right now, I gave a foretaste of that book for free. It's a free ebook called The Glass is Still Half Full. So if you went to any one of my platforms or my website, timelmore.com, The Glass is Still Half Full. It's 50 pages of early insights I picked up on the new book that's coming out next year.
Beautiful.
And can we get a commitment today that you'll be on the show next year?
Absolutely.
For the new book? All right.
If we
Well
can
done,
laugh,
Randy.
Well done.
if we
Well
can
done.
laugh next year, like I'm in, baby.
Tim, thank you. You are
My
an
pleasure.
absolute gift to all of us. Keep
Yes.
up the great work.
Thanks. My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Tim.
Yeah.
Hey there, I'm Brandon Smith. I'm one of the founders of the Leadership Foundry, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about what we do. If you're not familiar with the Leadership Foundry, we are a cutting-edge leadership development firm. We work with leaders across all different levels, across all different sectors, with the goal of helping you and them elevate your leadership to some of the most cutting-edge best practices today. Whether they're based on the themes of some of our books or some of the learnings we get from leaders out in the world, we are always trying to find some of the most practical things you can put in place to make your leadership that much more effective. What makes our approach so unique and innovative is our engagements are typically 6 months, with 2-hour sessions spread across those 6 months, typically 1 session per month, allowing leaders the opportunity to apply those learnings over that month. In addition, we pair every one of our leaders with a coach during their engagement. And that coach helps them not only implement those new things, but also helps them navigate some of the challenges they have. In addition to being cutting edge and innovative, we're also very affordable. Because we do so much of our work virtually, we can offer you a price point for this kind of leadership development that is probably lower than you've ever experienced. So if you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me. We are fielding our client list for 2025 right now and would love to talk to you a little bit further. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or any of my social media platforms, as well as my email, bsmith@myleadershipfoundry.com.